leaned over the casserole dish at my mother's funeral reception and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "I just hope Noelle has a plan. She's going to need one now that the free ride is over." I was standing 4 feet away. I heard every word. My mother had been in the ground for 6 hours. My name is Noelle Cartwright. I'm 38 years old. And for most of my life, I believed the story my mother's family told about us, that we were the poor branch, the struggling side, the ones who helped out of obligation and pitied over the holidays. My father left when I was 2. My mother raised me in a rented duplex in Dayton, Ohio. She drove a 2003 Civic until the transmission went out, and then she drove a 2006 Civic. She clipped coupons. She bought her jeans at Kohl's with a 30% off mailer. She packed her own lunch every single day for 31 years working at the county assessor's office. And every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering at my aunt and uncle's 5-bedroom colonial in Westerville, we showed up with a store-bought pie and sat at the end of the table and smiled while my cousins talked about their vacations and their renovations and their children's private school acceptance letters. My mother never complained, not once, not to me. I used to think that was weakness. For a long time, I was angry at her for it. I was wrong about so many things. She died on a Tuesday in October. Pancreatic cancer 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Fast and merciless, and somehow still a shock even though we knew it was coming. I held her hand in the hospice room, and she looked at me with those calm grey eyes of hers, and she said, "There's a man named Howard Finch. He'll find you. Let him." I didn't know what that meant. I was too hollowed out to ask. The funeral was held at the Methodist church she'd attended for 40 years. Small service. Maybe 70 people. Her co-workers came, a few neighbors, some women from her book club. My aunt and uncle drove up from Columbus with my 3 cousins and their spouses. My aunt wore a black dress that probably cost more than my mother's monthly rent. She hugged me at the door with that particular kind of hug that's mostly performance. "You're holding up so well," she said, in the voice people use when they mean the opposite. My cousin, the oldest one, the one who works in commercial real estate and has never once let you forget it, pulled me aside before the service and asked if I'd thought about what I was going to do with the duplex. My mother had rented it for 22 years. There was nothing to do with it. "I just mean financially," he said. "Going forward, it's going to be a big adjustment." I told him I appreciated his concern. "We could get you in touch with a financial advisor," he said. "Someone who works with people in transition." People in transition. I was 38 years old, employed with a graduate degree in urban planning. I had a 401k. I had a savings account. But in his mind, I was still the poor cousin, the charity case, the girl who showed up at Christmas with her single mother and her store-bought pie. I sat in the front pew during the service, and I stared at my mother's photo on the easel, and I thought about how little any of these people actually knew her. After the burial, everyone came back to the church fellowship hall. Casseroles, coffee cake, the kind of food that shows up whenever someone dies. That's when my aunt made her comment about the free ride being over. I picked up a paper cup of coffee and walked to the far side of the room, and I stood there looking out the window at the parking lot, and I breathed. My mother's best friend, a woman named Paulette who'd known her since college, appeared beside me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Your mother was the most intentional person I've ever known." I looked at her. "She made choices other people didn't understand," Paulette said. She was okay with that. I wanted to ask what she meant. But my cousin's wife chose that exact moment to come over and tell me she'd found a very affordable grief counselor if I needed a referral, and the moment dissolved. Howard Finch called me 11 days later. I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table, going through her filing cabinet, the kind of mundane heartbreak that follows a death. Insurance documents, utility bills, a folder of birthday cards she'd kept from me going back to 1991. He introduced himself as an attorney with Finch and Associates in Columbus. He said he'd been my mother's legal counsel for the past 19 years. He said he needed to meet with me at my earliest convenience. I assumed this was about settling her estate, the duplex lease, her car, whatever small savings she'd left behind. I drove to Columbus on a Thursday morning expecting to be in and out in an hour. His office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. The receptionist offered me water and a choice of coffees like I was there for a job interview. Howard Finch himself was a trim man in his late 60s with reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of quiet demeanor that makes you feel like everything is under control even before he speaks. He shook my hand and said, "I'm very sorry about your mother. She was an exceptional woman." "Thank you," I said. "I'm starting to think I didn't know how exceptional." He smiled, like that was exactly the right thing to say. "No," he said. "I don't imagine she told you much." He set a folder on the desk between us and he said, "Your mother's name was Beverly Ann Cartwright. She was also, for the past 23 years, the sole managing partner of a private holding company called Cartwright Legacy Partners." I stared at him. "The company holds interests in 11 residential real estate developments across central Ohio," he continued. "A commercial property in the short north, minority stakes in 3 regional businesses, and a municipal bond portfolio currently valued at approximately $4.3 million. The room was very quiet. "I'm sorry," I said. "What?" He slid the folder toward me. I opened it and looked at the first page, and the name Beverly Cartwright was right there at the top in black ink with a corporate seal and everything. "Where did this come from?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "Do you know much about your maternal grandparents?" I knew a little. My grandfather on my mother's side had died before I was born. My grandmother passed when I was 7. I remembered a small woman with white hair who pressed dollar bills into my hand and smelled like rose water. They'd been working-class people. My grandfather drove a delivery truck. Your grandfather, Howard Finch said, drove a delivery truck for 30 years. He also, starting in 1962, purchased a small piece of land outside of Columbus every time he had saved enough money to do it. Farmland mostly, parcels other people overlooked. He reinvested every penny of rental income. By the time he died in 1987, he had accumulated 42 acres across 7 different parcels. I thought about my grandmother's house, the worn carpet, the avocado green appliances. He never told anyone, Howard said. Not his family, not his neighbors. Your grandmother knew, but she honored his wish to keep it quiet. When he died, everything passed to her, and when she died, everything passed to her mother. My aunt, I said slowly, my mother's sister, received nothing per the will. Your grandfather designated your mother as sole heir. He paused. There were reasons for that. Your mother understood them. She never disputed it. I thought about all the years, all the Thanksgivings, my aunt's voice in the fellowship hall. "The free ride is over." My mother had $4.3 million, I said, and she drove a 2006 Civic. She drove it until last year, Howard confirmed. She also, in that time, funded the renovation of a low-income housing complex in Linden, endowed a scholarship at Ohio State in your grandfather's name, and structured the entire portfolio to transfer to you, tax efficiently, upon her death. I put my hands flat on the desk because I needed to feel something solid. "She never told me," I said. "She had her reasons," he said. "She wrote you a letter. Would you like to read it now, or take it with you?" I took it with me. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes before I opened it. My mother's handwriting was small and neat, the same handwriting that had been on my birthday cards my whole life. "Noelle," she wrote, "I know this is a lot. I know you probably have questions I can't answer anymore, and I'm sorry for that. I want to explain the most important one first. I kept this from you because I watched what money does to people when they know about it too early. I watched it happen to your aunt. My parents gave her every advantage, and she learned to expect things instead of earn them. I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to know how to live without it, how to find your own way, how to build something real before you ever knew this existed. Your grandfather used to say that real wealth is what you carry in your bones, not your bank account. He lived that way his whole life. I tried to. The Civic worked fine. I laughed out loud in the parking garage, alone, and then I cried for a while, and then I drove home. I did not call my aunt that day, or the next. I had a lot to process, and I had Howard, and I had a 6-inch stack of documents to read through. And honestly, I needed time to sit with the fact that my mother had been quietly, methodically, extraordinarily herself for 64 years, and I had only scratched the surface of knowing her. The scholarship fund was the thing that undid me. She'd endowed it in my grandfather's name, the Reginald Howe Scholarship for first-generation students, and she'd been funding it for 16 years. I found the list of recipients. 43 students. 43 kids who'd gotten through school because my grandfather bought a piece of farmland in 1962, and my mother drove a 2006 Civic and kept her mouth shut at family dinners. I sat with all of that for 2 months. My aunt called a few times. Practical things, mostly. She wanted to know if she could have my mother's china set, whether I was planning to keep paying for the family plot maintenance, whether I'd looked into grief counseling. I answered politely and briefly. I wasn't ready. I was ready in January. I'd spent December getting to know Howard properly, understanding the portfolio, meeting the property managers and the accountants and the woman at the community development nonprofit my mother had partnered with for the Linden project. I asked a lot of questions. I took a lot of notes. I started to understand, in a real way, what my mother had built and what it meant to steward it. I also, in that time, found out that my cousin, the commercial real estate one, had been quietly pitching a development project in the short north to a city council member, a project on a block that included the commercial property my mother owned, a property he almost certainly didn't know she owned. I didn't say anything yet. My aunt organized a family dinner in January, the kind she did every year at her house in Westerville. She called it a fresh start for the new year. I said I'd come. She sounded surprised. I wore a good dress. Not ostentatious, just well-fitted, the kind of thing I wouldn't have bought for myself 2 years ago. I drove my own car, a perfectly normal 4-year-old Subaru, and I showed up at 7 o'clock with a very good bottle of wine. My aunt seemed pleased, which meant she thought things were proceeding as expected. My cousin was there with his wife, and my other 2 cousins with their families, and my uncle, who mostly watched football and stayed out of things. We sat down to dinner, and it went the way it always went for a while. Safe topics, the kids' activities, someone's kitchen renovation, the usual. Then my cousin mentioned the Short North project. He was talking to my uncle about it, across the table, describing the block, the development potential, the investors he'd been lining up. He was animated. He loves the sound of his own voice when he's talking about deals. There's one property on the block that's the holdout, he said. Small commercial building, single story, the owner's some LLC out of Columbus apparently. We've been trying to get a meeting, but nobody knows who's actually behind it. I took a sip of my wine. I might be able to help with that, I said. He looked at me. So did my aunt. Cartwright Legacy Partners, I said. That's the LLC. I'm the managing partner. The table went quiet. My uncle looked confused. My aunt's expression went through 4 different things in about 2 seconds. My cousin stared at me like I'd said something in a language he didn't recognize. That building was my mother's, I said. It's mine now. And I'm not selling. The dinner continued. People ate. Conversation resumed eventually in that stilted way it does when something has shifted fundamentally and everyone is pretending it hasn't. My aunt asked me carefully what else was involved in the estate. I told her, briefly and factually, about the portfolio. I didn't make it dramatic. I didn't need to. The facts were dramatic enough on their own. My cousin was quiet for the rest of the evening. On my way out, my aunt caught me in the hallway. Just the 2 of us. Why didn't Beverly tell anyone? She said. Her voice was tight. You'd have to ask her, I said, but I think she knew exactly what she was doing. My aunt looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not quite guilt, not quite understanding, but something adjacent to both. She always was the smart one, she said finally. It came out quieter than I think she intended. I drove home through the January dark, past the Columbus skyline, past the exits I'd taken 100 times growing up, and I thought about my mother packing her lunch every morning, clipping her coupons, pressing her slacks for work, sitting at the end of my aunt's table with a store-bought pie and a quiet smile, building something extraordinary in the background, and choosing, deliberately, completely, to let people underestimate her. I thought about my grandfather buying his first piece of farmland for $2,000 in 1962. A delivery truck driver who believed that what you build quietly outlasts what you proclaim loudly. I thought about 43 scholarship students who never knew where their money came from. I thought about my mother's last words to me. Let him find you. Not fight for what's yours. Not make them pay. Just let the truth come when it's ready. I'm still learning to run the portfolio. I still call Howard more than is probably necessary. I still don't entirely know what I'm doing most days. But I know what my mother built, and I know why she built it the way she did, and I know that the Reginald Howe Scholarship is fully funded through 2041. The Civic is in my driveway now. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Some mornings I go out and sit in it for a few minutes before work. That worn steering wheel, that particular smell, the little crack in the dashboard from where a water bottle shifted on a hot day. It still works fine. I keep coming back to the Civic, not the money, not the portfolio, not the 14th-floor office in Columbus with the good coffee, the car. A 2006 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a worn steering wheel, sitting in my driveway right now because I couldn't bring myself to let it go. My mother had $4.3 million, and she drove that car until last year. She packed her lunch. She clipped coupons. She sat at the end of my aunt's table every Thanksgiving for decades and smiled and said nothing while people looked right through her. For a long time I thought that was a kind of defeat. I understand now that it was a choice, and one of the most deliberate ones I've ever witnessed. What my mother built didn't happen because she was lucky, or because she stumbled into something. It happened because she was disciplined enough to understand what actually mattered and patient enough to protect it. My grandfather started with a delivery truck and a $2,000 piece of farmland in 1962. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't need anyone to know. He just kept going, parcel by parcel, year by year. And when he died, the thing he'd built was real and solid and still standing. My mother inherited that work ethic the same way she inherited the land, completely and quietly. That's the part that stays with me. Not the reveal, not my cousin's face when I said the name Cartwright Legacy Partners across his own dinner table. What stays with me is the picture of my mother at 20-something, newly widowed with a toddler, inheriting something most people would have either sold immediately or talked about for the rest of their lives. She did neither. She found Howard Finch, she learned what she needed to learn, and she got to work. 43 scholarship students, 11 housing developments, a community in Linden that got renovated because one woman in Dayton made good decisions for 2 decades and kept her mouth shut about it. That takes something most people don't talk about when they talk about success. It's not just discipline or intelligence, though it's both of those too. It's a kind of moral clarity about what you're actually doing and why. My mother wasn't building wealth to prove something to her sister. She was building it to carry forward what her father started, to give it legs, to make it land somewhere useful. The scholarship fund was fully in motion before I ever knew it existed. She didn't need my approval or my awe. She just needed to do the right thing with what she'd been given. I think about that when I'm in over my head with Howard, which is still often. I don't have my mother's decades of quiet practice. I'm learning in real time, making mistakes, calling him on Thursday mornings with questions I probably should have figured out myself. But I know what I'm trying to carry forward. I know what the work is for. My aunt said at the end of that January dinner that my mother was always the smart one. It came out smaller than she meant it. I think, like an admission she hadn't planned to make. She was right. But it wasn't just intelligence. It was the combination of knowing what was worth doing, having the patience to do it without an audience, and never once letting someone else's opinion of her become her opinion of herself. The Civic still works fine. I'm going to keep it.